So, welcome. First of all, I should ask, how long do you have for your tour?
Whole day.
Excellent, excellent. I should introduce to you Mr. Kosh Prasadacharya. He is co-director of the project here. He is former Director General of Archaeology and a UNESCO consultant. So he is part of the genesis of the project. Would you like to say something, Mr. Acharya? And you've already met Basanta, who is my oldest Nepali friend. Sorry, Nepali friend who I have known for longest, not oldest. We first met in 1989 in Anuradhapura, where I was doing my PhD excavating in the citadel of Anuradhapura. So Basanta at that time was Chief Archaeological Officer for Lumbini Development Trust. So I have known him since there. Welcome to the site of Tilaurakot, which, as you will see in the boards, we call Tilaurakot Kapilavastu. The project here has been working supported by Japanese funds and trusts for UNESCO, but they have provided the majority of the support. They have provided support for a multidisciplinary approach. So I'm an archaeologist, but they have supported us in terms of bringing what we would call heritage science. So we've used geophysical survey, we use optically stimulated luminescence dating, we use XRF, we use thin section, because what we're interested in is not traditional archaeological approaches, but to try to expand as much information through archaeological science as possible. Within the project, we also have planners from Japan and conservators from Italy. So the aim is that it's more of a holistic approach. Partly it's been supporting the nomination dossier for World Heritage status, which is currently, I believe, in the ministry and should soon be submitted for World Heritage status. So you've been to Lumbini already? No, you will go to Lumbini. Wonderful. Okay, lovely, lovely. So this is a city site. The city site is where we've been focusing to try and understand more about the city. One of the challenges is that for generations, people have tried to understand or to recreate what was Kapilavastu like. You see, whether you look in Gandharan art, you see beautiful carvings, where sculptors based in Pakistan, Afghanistan try to imagine 1st, 2nd centuries CE onwards. What did ancient Kapilavastu look like? If you look at the art, it's all Hellenistic. It's beautiful Hellenistic pillars, people dressed very much a Hellenistic world. If you look, say, at Sanchi, at one of the great Turanas, there's another imagination of tiers of palaces, high city walls. You go to Myanmar, you see also imaginations. So almost every cultural group has imagined what ancient Kapilavastu looks like. And in a way, for an archaeologist, this is a challenge, because everyone has in their heart and in their mind a concept of what it looks like, when here we have physical evidence of what we have. It does not always map against what is in the mind or in the heart. And that is one of the challenges that we have, because if you think of the life, the time of the life of the Buddha, 6th century BCE, there is no brick. There is very, very little stone. The most material that people use is timber and mud and thatch. So when you think about architecture, when you think about what a city looked like, you have to completely reimagine what are the materials technically available at that time. For some pilgrims, this is very sad. But our job as archaeologists is to try to look at what is imagined, what is in the text, and physically what we can reconstruct. Now, when people think of the ancient city of Kapilavastu, they also think of a walled city, a city with 4 gates, the palace in the middle. Now, there is an interesting question that much of the description of this we've received is from the Chinese pilgrims, Fasan and Wanzang. They are recording within hundreds of years later. So the monuments that they are seeing are monuments that they experienced at their time of their visit, either 5th century or 7th centuries of the Common Era, almost a millennia after the lifetime of the Buddha. So the historical topography they are describing is of that contemporary moment, not necessarily the actual physical remains from the time of the life of the Buddha. So because you're a group of academics and practitioners, this is why I'm being a little cruel at the beginning in order to try to build up. Now, one of the challenges of understanding a city is how do you understand the city? So this is when I first had the opportunity of visiting the city. And how do you persuade pilgrims? How do you persuade academics that this is an ancient city? It's like a jungle at times.
Nothing there.
Nothing there. This is for me one of the most significant maps because this is PC Mukherjee.
Mukherjee. Yeah.
PC Mukherjee is clearly the main pioneer in this area. So 1890s, he is a draftsman, and he comes and he does this plan. We should orient it because this is north towards there, so this is how he looks at it. The key features he picks up are the key features we're interested in, because he identifies a brick wall surrounding it, he identifies 4 gates, he identifies a series of mounds, which of course he associates as the stupas. He identifies an eastern stupa, a departure. He also is interested just beyond the city walls. So he picks up there's a moat, there's an outer town, and also inside he starts clearing buildings. He can see, for example, on the surface there's a big brick structure, and he writes on it, Palace of Buddha's Father, ? And then he says up here, most probably the site of ancient Kapilavastu. Now, what is interesting, his plan is actually an exceptionally good plan. It's really a very good plan for the time. His understanding of archaeology is, of course, 19th century. Alexander Cunningham and others have the same approach. They're using the Chinese itineraries, the pilgrim itineraries. They're doing what we would now call very sort of haphazard, unscientific approaches. But at the time, that's how Bodh Gaya was discovered, Kushanagara, Sarnath, all of them are discovered at that time. Now, we have the advantage of science. So we have done a geophysical survey of all of the interior of the walled city.
The ground penetrating radar.
And this is not ground penetrating radar, this is magnetometer.
Magnetometer.
So we use magnetometry. Magnetometry works on a very simple understanding that all of the ground below the surface is magnetic. Some areas are more magnetic, other areas less magnetic. What happens is, if you have clay, it will have a sort of base magnetism. If you then if you make the clay into a brick, you put the brick into a kiln, you subject the brick to firing within a kiln, it will increase its magnetism. Therefore, if you have a brick on the surface next to clay, it will have an area of higher magnetism, lower magnetism. If you have a wall below the surface, you will have a linear marking of higher magnetism. So what we do is we do one recording every 25 centimeters. So we have an array which straps on, it's a very heavy array, it's maybe 15 kg, so straps on. it records Earth's magnetic field every 25 centimeters. So we have done the whole of this. We've also done outside the city. We've probably covered something like 15 to 20 hectares in terms of geophysical survey. Now this area has been almost perfect, and this is the plot within the city. So again, orientation is north, so this is north. Can you see any lines? Can you see any lines? Yes, you can see lines.
Some horizontal.
Okay, if you think this is 450 meters by 350 meters, you can see some black lines. You can also see some white lines. Now, the way we use this represents our readings recorded every 25 centimeters. If it's high magnetism, we make it dark. If it's very low magnetism, we make it white. Where you see lines which are black, this means walls. For example, like this, and on scale, this is about 30 meters by 30 meters.
So outer wall of the maybe.
No. So what we have is, this is the city wall, this is the whole of the interior of the city. So within the city wall, what we have is the plan of the city. The white lines are where there is no brick.
I see.
They are streets. Because the streets don't have tarmac, they have just mud.
Yeah.
So it means there is no
That's
brick,
right.
therefore the streets are unmagnetic. Therefore, if you look, we have a complete street plan. And the street plan is gridiron street plan. Now what we've done to make it easier for visitors, all of these walkways are set on where we have picked up archaeological streets. So for example, this is one of the western gates just here behind you. This wooden walkway follows the ancient road which actually goes to the center of the city to the crossroads. So we can't excavate everything. Also, the archaeology here is about 20 centimeters below your feet. Therefore, if we have hundreds and hundreds of pilgrims, they will steadily wear away everything. Therefore, these walkways are both useful for visitors because you begin to understand the grid of the city, but also they protect the site as well. Now, if you look, we have actually multiple streets, but at the center we have a huge walled enclosure. So this is, sorry, that's the same. The interpretation is this one. So this is the interpretation. Now, with all archaeology, you need archaeological interpretation. So what we have blue are the streets. So you can see we actually have multiple streets, and instead of having 4 gates, we have multiple gates. So we have, this is one gate, we have another gate, another gate, another gate, we have multiple gates. And right in the center, we have a central wall complex measuring about 100 meters by 100 meters, and that is at the crossroads of the city. So to get an understanding of actually the topography, this is the first time in South Asia we have the complete geophysical survey of a city, and therefore we have the plan. Now, brick, as you remember I mentioned, is not dating to the time of the Buddha. We have excavated in places below the brick walls, and under the brick walls we have evidence of buildings in timber.
Timber wall. Oh.
So what we actually have is the legacy of the initial foundation of the city is timber. The legacy is then repeated period after period after period, but later they build in brick. So where you see brick structures on the surface, actually they are mirroring originally structures built in timber, which date to the contemporary time of the life of the Buddha. Okay? So what we'll do is, any questions before we start going in?
So that brick is a cushion brick, right?
The fortifications will take you to a part of the fortification where we work more on. The first city fortifications date to 6th century BCE.
6th century BCE.
6th century BCE.
That's a timber.
They are timber.
timber.
And we have two phases, and the wall is exactly the same plan, but it's built in timber. So if you think of the earliest, what was a city wall, it was a series of timber posts, probably with bamboo interweaving. So it's a very simple sort of city wall. We have two phases of that. Then in about 1st century BCE, we have a mud rampart lifted.
Mud rampart.
So mud rampart goes over it. On the top of the mud rampart, we have a timber fence. And then later, Kushan period, we have a brick wall built on top.
쿠션블리.
And then final phase, we have a series of towers. Small towers, maybe 3 meters by about 2 meters, added on the interior. So what you see at the moment is the final phase, and it looks to us like during the final phase some of the gates are closed. So if you look, this is one of the gates, but we're climbing up into the gate. So what we believe is that in the later phases this is blocked. And at the later period, Kushana period, in fact the main gate then becomes one of the eastern gates.
I see.
So there is a shifting within the city. So when we're dealing with the city is changing over time. Okay? So
Okay. Thank you.
We'll move to a saying, which you'll have to forgive me for saying, which is archaeology is like gambling. At the beginning of your season, you take all your money and you put it down in one point.
Where to dig?
Where to dig. And you hope that where you're going to dig, you will be lucky. Sometimes you're lucky, sometimes you lose all your money, you leave it. The geophysics has actually completely changed our view because we have this complete view of the city and also outside the city, it means we've had questions every year we excavate. So for example, we've been able to look at the plan to say, this is an interesting set of buildings. What our question is, what is the function? Is this residential? Is it religious? Is it administrative? So every year we've chosen exactly which building we want to work on, and then we've managed to put that. So we've removed the gambling. In a way it's a little boring, because to some extent we know what we're going to encounter, or we hope, but still actually that's the way we've approached this site, because we cannot excavate everything. We do not wish to excavate everything, because technology is changing, technology is improving. If you look at Mr. Acharya and I excavated in 1999 over there, if you look at the techniques we used in 99, compare them with the techniques we use today, it's completely transformed. Therefore, what we're trying to do is when we excavate, we're trying to select certain monuments to help visitors understand some of the history of the building. Now, often within cities, you look at palaces, you look at temples. How did ordinary people live? So we thought this was a beautiful building in the geophysics. It came out really, really clearly, and we thought we'd excavate. Now, this is a small house. You are standing in the street, so the roads here are about 10 meters wide. So the footpaths, of course, are narrow, but this road runs north-south. It's at a junction because here there is an east-west road here. Now what we have is a beautiful little house because this is the compound. It's L-shaped. Probably where Dr. Cooper's is, there's a little fence running along here, and here's a fence. So here's a little courtyard. Inner courtyard. So we have the street, then we come into the inner courtyard. Here we have a veranda. So this is the veranda, and behind we have a series of small rooms. The veranda comes around here, and so we have small rooms. So this gives you an idea of actually how people live. Little courtyard, L-shaped building. Now, you may wonder why we have the holes in the brickwork. Because normally, if you see brick, you expect a big, tall brick wall. Here, the technology is that they use brick during the Kushana period. This is all Kushana period. They use brick for foundations. So they put in shallow foundations. The superstructure is timber. So these are actually from post holes.
Yes.
So you build the foundations in bricks, then you have timber frame. The timber frame is then coated with mud. So the walls are mud, and then we have no roof tile excavated here, so the roof is thatch. So this gives you a really interesting idea. Now this is very similar to vernacular houses in the village.
Yeah.
So during winter, it's insulated, it's warm. During summer, it's insulated, it's cool. This is in a way beautifully sustainable architecture. Now, these buildings are actually 20 centimeters below the ground. What we found though is if you keep a hole open, during monsoon it fills up with water. So what we've done is we've used the exact plan, we've made replicas of the right shaped bricks, so then the master craftsmen have made this conservation so that visitors can see it, and also we've cut the post holes so they can understand the technology, because often with conservation you see none of the technology. This way we are protecting the site. Also we have to say that many pilgrims like to go home with a sacred souvenir. So often you will see them hammering at bricks to take. So in a way this is sacrificial. This gives information, helps you understand about ordinary housing, but also people can see it, but it is not destroying the original. So now we'll just head over to this building. Everywhere where you see mounds, these are major archaeological buildings. So you can see, you tend to get trees on them because it's rubble and the trees are growing in the rubble. But these are major buildings which have collapsed. We're very lucky here that after the city was abandoned, it was not reoccupied. Therefore, there is very, very little robbing out of the buildings, which means when you start excavating here, within 20 centimeters, you find buildings everywhere, which is partly why, of course, we have the walkways. But we're very lucky. Many of the other great cities, if you think about the capital of Patna, Pataliputra, it's completely built over now. You can never really excavate it. Here, we're very lucky the city was completely abandoned. The evidence we have is the city is completely abandoned at about 1000 AD. So 1000 AD the city is completely abandoned. Then we begin to get reoccupation from about 1740, 1750. But we're very lucky that it's not really reused.
Thank you. Thank you.
Again, this dates to the Kushana period. Now, as I mentioned, there are multiple gates. We came in on one of the western gates with the road running this way. If you look here, you can see a small depression between these trees. This is another gate. So this gate would lead to the river. So the river Banganga is just about half a kilometre in that direction. Originally it would have been right up to the city, and in fact if you look at the city, do you see this part missing? This is because the river has actually eroded this part away. So the river initially was very close to the site, but this is one of the gates. So this gate leads to this road, and this road goes to the so-called Eastern Gate. Now, what's interesting is if you imagine you're coming in during the Kushana period, you come through the gate, you walk along the roadway, and this is an open courtyard. So this is like a city square. Along the side of the city square, you have a series of small rooms. Now, if I were Sir John Marshall at Taxila, I would say small room on the side of a square, these are shops. That is traditionally the interpretation. They have behind them small courtyards with rooms off, so probably these are small units on the front, may well be shops, and then living quarters behind. So it gives you an idea what's behind. This building, however, is quite interesting because this is in the middle of the square. It's a big building. You can see it also has post holes. We also found roof tiles, which is very rare. Most of the buildings only have thatch. This building has roof tiles, so this is something special. It has mud walls. It has thatch. It has roof tile on the roof. In it, we found lots of oil lamps, and at this end, we found two huge ingots of iron. At this end, we also have some terracotta figurines. So what we assume this is if you're an archaeologist, if you can't interpret, you call it ritual. So we've identified this maybe as a shrine, which would make sense. It's close to the entrance. The deposition of these two huge ingots, the oil lamps. This is working hypothesis only, but it gives you an idea of the fabric of the city, of how, if you imagine the Chinese pilgrims coming in to see the ruins, what would have been there.
So could be a Hindu temple at that time?
The question is, do modern terminologies such as Hindu, do they apply directly to the past? Do we have fuzzy boundaries?
Okay.
What is really interesting is this site, we have huge Buddhist monasteries. We have a gigantic Buddhist monastery out towards the east. We also have Buddhist stupas towards the north. Inside the city, this last year and over the next month, we found two stupas in the interior.
You talk about the huge monastery outside of eastern city, which means Suenjang talk about Samitia, 3,000 monks. That size?
Out there, it covers maybe 350 meters by about 150
Really?
meters.
Oh, huge one.
Huge.
One. Oh.
Huge. It's extremely large. But we also have monasteries inside the city, very late phase. But out there, it's from at least, we've picked up material which is Mauryan. So it's from at least 3rd century BC. We have this huge monastic complex out there.
But I always think monk of 3,000, if they can survive, at least huge population surrounding there to support them. But Suenjang and Pasien, both of them mentioned hardly any people living there and no authority. How can we be so sure? You know, that sort of.
No, that is an interesting question. It's the same with the, when he visits Sri Lanka. When he visits Abhayagiri,
Abhayagiri Bihara.
He says there are 8,000 monks there. 10,000.
So number might be exaggerated. Number might be. Do you think?
Well, you should speak to Max D.
Okay. No, I'm amateur archaeologist.
Okay, what do you see here?
Pond.
Very good. Okay, you can see it dips down. In the geophysics, we actually picked it up as a major rectangle. It's actually more square. It measures about 30 meters by 30 meters. We excavated it. So this shows you it's brick lined, and the brick tanks here are very interesting because they're stepped. You have one brick, then the brick steps back, steps back, steps back. The date of this is 3rd century BC, which is really interesting because it's Mauryan. It's the only example we have of civic Mauryan urban infrastructure. No other example. Now it begins to silt up, but we found at many of the monasteries, out in the eastern monastery, we have 3 tanks. They use the same method of stepped tank. And also at Ramagrama Stupa, we were working there in November. There is also a very large tank. So it seems that in this area, formal brick tanks are a key part of the Buddhist area. So it survives extremely well to about 26 courses. And what's interesting, it's built into the city plan. So when you're planning a city, you plan your streets, you also plan your tanks as part of that.
This is Mauryan place.